Hi, my name is Rami Ismail. I'm one half of Dutch independent studio Vlambeer, and I travel a lot. Now, for those of you that don't know Vlambeer, Vlambeer is an independent studio from the Netherlands. We are a two-man studio. We're best known for games like Super Crate Box, Luftrausers, the iOS Game of the Year winner, Ridiculous Fishing, and currently working on a game called Nuclear Throne. But I don't want to talk about that today. I want to talk about the travel part of what I do. So I travel a lot. In fact, after this talk, I'm going to hop on an airplane to give a talk in Berlin. And then after that talk, hop on an airplane to give a talk in Dubrovnik. And then after that talk, hop on an airplane to go back to Berlin to give another talk. And I travel to a lot of places in the world, not just places that you traditionally associate with the games industry. Part of the thing that I really like seeing is going to places that we don't think about when we think about the games industry. I visit a lot of places in Africa, in the Middle East, in South America, a lot of places in Asia, in Southeast Asia, Eastern Europe. Basically, I go all over the world, and the thing I do is I try to talk to developers in those territories, figure out if there are things that they need that I could potentially help with, but also to figure out what is different about games from different territories. Now, there's one thing I keep running into over and over again when I ask people in different territories, in these emergent territories, what their biggest problem is. And that's this. Now, how many people here know Arabic? So there are two people that can tell me what it is that I want to talk about. Language. Correct. This is the word loga, and it means language. It's Arabic. And it should really come as no surprise that I want to talk about language, because it is kind of a big issue. It's kind of a big deal, and it's not a thing that we talk about. Language is critical not just to our personal identity, it's critical to our cultures, it's critical to our understanding of the world. It's a very often overlooked expression of our identity and culture. And through language, we structure our ideas and thoughts, and over again, it is kind of suggested that for which we don't have words cannot be properly understood. And language is a fascinating concept to me. I'm a programmer, and it's interesting that it's so contrasted from the cold binary logic of computers. Language is context sensitive, it's ambiguous, it's a highly fallible communication method. Words we all think we agree about mean radically different things to different people, depending on the context, sometimes the association, sometimes misunderstanding. Computers, you give them zeros and ones, and they do what zeros and ones are supposed to do, without question. But regardless of how fallible language may be, it is our main interface with other human beings, and it's the one that's most capable of transmitting high-level concepts and cultural statements. And through new words, we learn to think about new things, and that allows us to think about more complex or more granular things. Now, in the games industry, we very rarely have to think about other languages, and I'm afraid to say that that is not for any noble reason. It is because our industry has traditionally mostly been creating for territories that understand either English or Japanese. If you're attending here today, you speak English, probably. So today I want to take you with me into a world in which the only games you can play your native language are This Is Football, Wall-E, and FIFA 2012. And that world is the reality for about 500 million people. For a market of 500 million people. For a demographic of 500 million people that could aspire to be game developers. Arabic is spoken by 500 million people on the planet, compared to English 1.5 billion people. Even if you combine those two, just for context, if you combine Arabic's 500 million and English 1.2 billion people, those two languages make for less than 30% of the world's population. In other words, I'm not really talking about Arabic here. I'm talking about any language that isn't English. Our industry is terrible at language. And because it's terrible at language, it's terrible at culture. Our industry might be working on diversity, which is great. But the honest truth is that most of us, probably all of us, don't actually know what that word really entails. You know, you want to know what the largest minority in the world is? It's people that can't understand what I'm saying right now. And we can't understand their complaints. English is the native language of just over 5% of the world's population. It's the third largest language in the world after Mandarin Chinese, which is spoken natively by 15% of the world, and Spanish at about 6% of the world's population. English is a first or second language to an estimated 1.2 billion people, which is 16.5% of the planet, only behind Mandarin Chinese, which is spoken as a first or second language by 1.4 billion people. English really isn't as common as we like to think, and it's definitely not as common as is portrayed in the media that we can watch. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that while English is the lingua franca of our industry, it's accessible to less than 1 out of 5 people in the world. At 80%, that creates what is by far the largest minority in the world. Diversity, most people understand the word as little as most of you will understand the word that's on the screen. They're not only invisible, they're excluded from the very word that's supposed to be fighting for them. This word, by the way, it means diversity. That's how it feels like to have people talk about your issues in a language you don't understand. It means absolutely nothing. And it means nothing to 80% of the planet. Now, this is what our diversity looks like in most of the world. Wherever I travel, if it's not an English-speaking country, talking about diversity results in awkward laughter. Because this is what Arabic in many games looks like. Let me reassure you, that's not Arabic. In fact, Arabic is so poor in so many games and so much media that a New York City-based artist, Rami Ismail, actually started a Tumblr called nopenotarabic.tumblr.com, where he collects things that look like Arabic, but that very clearly aren't Arabic. And you find them in the worst places. You find them on posters for drugs prevention, drugs abuse prevention. You find them on posters for domestic abuse prevention. Not Arabic. It looks like Arabic, but nobody took the time to actually check whether it actually is Arabic or whether it actually says anything. In games, we are very good at portraying non-Western countries. If we are talking mostly about either stereotypes or bragging about the ragdolls of the dying Arabs. And that's what they're trying to sell over there as well. This screenshot is from a game that cost $100 million to make. $100 million. The shooting Arabs in the face is more realistic than ever before. The cars explode with more force than ever before. But checking whether this huge, enormous sign in the corner of one of the levels actually is Arabic was a bit too much. The same sentiment is not, this sentiment doesn't just exist in the Arab world. I went to Russia and I asked them whether this was a problem with Russians. Well, guess what? Most Russians in games, you shoot at them. And the Russian is terribly off, and the accent is wrong, and they speak Russian in places where they shouldn't speak Russian. So is this a problem? Yes, this is a problem. This hurts the games industry. Why does it hurt the games industry? Because if your representation in video games is the people you shoot, that's not very welcoming. This is one of my favorite games, and it's part of the curation that I have outside, the Gamedev.world curation. It's an Iranian game called Farsh. It was made by a designer under the name Mahdi Bahrami. He's a wonderful, wonderful designer. And this game is about carpets. And this game could not exist if a Western person tried to make it. And I can't 100% claim that, but I'm like 99.9% sure. Because if you ask any European American designer, I want something that can contract and expand in a video game. The metaphor most people here will look for is either some abstract shape or a snake. Because that's what we think about when you have something that expands and contracts. Mahdi spent a lot of his life rolling carpets. That is not a job. If you live in the Arabic world, I was partially raised in Egypt, you have carpets in your home. You have carpets in your home because there is sand. And every once in a while, you roll up the carpets, you probably live in an apartment building, you roll the carpets up the stairs, you rotate them as you go, and you air them. And then bring them back. Mahdi thought about that in context of a game and made Farsh. If you play Farsh, you'll agree that it is kind of a unique game. I've never played anything like Farsh. And the only way Mahdi could make this was because unconsciously, unintentionally, he was putting his culture into this game. Because making cultural games is something I get asked about a lot. Like, how do I make a cultural game? This is a question I get from most countries, not very often in the United States for some reason. I guess you've got culture figured out here. But making cultural games is automatic. You make something, you're a creator. If you create something, you're gonna put your biases, your thoughts, your unconsciousness into the game by default. There's no way to avoid that. So here we have a games industry in which being an Arab essentially means getting shot at, and a world that wants to make video games. There's something there that we could do, probably. And I want to talk about that a bit. Because imagine you grow up in the Arab world, and the Arab world, you know, you end up deciding that you want to make video games anyway. Now, much of the Arab world isn't that kind to the whole idea of making video games. You can become an engineer, a lawyer, or a doctor, and those are your three options in life. And if you don't do those, then you're probably a failure. So yeah, I decided to make video games, right? Somebody decides to make video games. They start working, and it turns out that most computers were not made for any language outside of English. In fact, this is a MacBook that is not mine, and the person that owns this MacBook had to install the Arabic language pack for PowerPoint to display Arabic at all. If I copy-paste Arabic from Word to PowerPoint, it reverses the direction in which the letters are written on Windows by default in 2015. 2015, if I copy-paste between Word and PowerPoint, I have to double-check that it didn't mess it up. That's how well computers work with non-English languages. So that's another barrier. So you've got the barrier of games are not friendly to you, and computers are not made for you. And then in Egypt, 800 people attended the Global Game Jam this year, which made it, I think, the third largest venue in the world. There are game developer enthusiasts everywhere. There are people trying to make games everywhere. And people are in games regardless of the ridiculous amount of obstacles that language has thrown in their way. And the reality is, even if they make something really, really good, something really, really special, something that we would all love, they won't be able to reach us. Unless they are very good at English, most people are gonna take their half properly written press release with a bunch of typos as, no, there's a typo. I mean, if you're gonna do a press release, at least get it right. Yeah, that's cool. Would be great if people there had access to English class or even English contacts. A lot of people don't. And Egypt is actually a very progressive country, has access to a lot of these schoolings. A lot of kids, a lot of richer kids anyway, go to English schools so that they learn English, so that they can participate in the global economy. A lot of people in this screenshot do not, in this photo, sorry, screenshot, wow. A lot of people in this photo do not speak English fluently. They speak English a bit. They've taught themselves to program without access to the Unity documentation, without access to the GameMaker documentation, without access to C# documentation in their language. They have to just kind of guess and hope that if indeed is an if statement and not something else. But on top of that, if you make something good, what do? Well, you submit it to events if you would know about them, which you don't. Or you submit it to the press, which you can't reach because most press, surprisingly, in the US doesn't speak Arabic. Or platforms, because most big platforms in the world actually do not support releasing games in most territories around the world. Try getting a dev kit outside of the United States of America. It can be really tough. In South America, it's really cool right now. You can get PlayStation 3 dev kits. Exciting. And that's not even a criticism. That puts Sony ahead of most companies in the world. So even if you make something cool, you're still kind of stuck. Now, in my travels, I've sort of been looking at these different cultures, and I recently wrote a blog post about the stages that a community goes through, and I've kind of identified like 5 or 6 stages that communities go through. So in stage 1, you've got no community at all. The developers create games individually, they don't know each other, they don't do meetups, they don't really like talk amongst each other. And that's where most countries like sort of are stuck at the start. Stage 2 is actually the most common one. It's where developers have found each other and are organizing local events. Those local events are really important because you create an atmosphere in which you can share knowledge. And since we're all here, I think we can all agree that sharing knowledge is a cool thing that is probably good, right? So at stage 3, you go to international exchange. Now, international exchange is really interesting because it means that either the local community starts to invite people from outside the country to bring new ideas or perspectives, or people from the community start going to events like the Game Developers Conference, or Indicate, or Games for Change. Those people bring back knowledge, and they bring back context. Now, what that is required for is what I'm afraid that I don't have a better word for it, it's for a hero, or a heroine, like either one. The hero is important, because the hero is the person that makes the first game that is a hit. And a lot of things change when you can make a hit in a country, when you can have a financial, or a cultural, or a critical success. When you can say, without a doubt, that this is a dream that is not just a dream. This is possible. We can do this. You just have to do it. And when that happens, something changes. Something changes at the heart of the community, because the struggle is no longer to prove that it can be lucrative to make games, or that you can reach a cultural statement through games. Like, at that point, nobody is thinking about cultural statements. At that point, people are thinking about, how can I make a hit? And the answer is, make something that looks like Angry Birds. And that's what a lot of people do. And then we all laugh at the fact that all these games are unoriginal and clones, and the fact is, they are. A lot of those games are clones or very simple reiterations of existing concepts. Why? Because that's the only thing they know might work. Because they don't have access to all the fun talks that we do. They don't have access to all the fun information that we share. They don't have access to somebody telling them that if somebody tells you about how they become successful, that gravy train is like kind of disappeared over the horizon. Somebody can tell you how they became successful, that story is not useful to you anymore, because that one already happened. They don't have access to that, so that is a very common method of doing things. As soon as the hero emerges, people know that you can have success, and you can have success on your own terms. Then an interesting thing happens, which is that most people start making games like the games the hero made. You saw this in Uruguay. You saw this in a bunch of other countries around the world recently, where Kingdom Rush in Uruguay came out. And a lot of people started making games that were kind of like Tower Defense. Wonderful game, by the way. Now, stage 5 is actually my favorite one, and it's kind of the weirdest one, and it's where most of the Western world is stuck. And it's the rebellion phase, as I call it. You've got the hero, and everybody hates them. And the reason they hate them is because it's not that they dislike them, but they want to be as successful as that, or reach the critical acclaim of that, or the cultural acclaim of that, but not that. They want to make not Kingdom Rush. They want to make something else. And that's where the cultural explosion in the community happens. That's where people start talking about their culture. That's where people start talking about originality, about creativity, about stuff like that. And that is the stage where most of the world is actually in right now. Now, I have a stage 6, but it's kind of a cheat. Stage 6 is sort of a temporary phase that countries can be in which they're sort of a worldwide thought leader, which currently is here, as usual. But basically what I want to communicate is that stage 2 of this process is a terrible stage to be in. Because people are sharing knowledge, but they don't have a way to verify the knowledge that they're spreading. And I have heard terrible things. I have heard people quote a sarcastic talk that was given at GDC, poking fun at how people do business, being quoted as actual real business advice. And I've seen companies based on that knowledge. People run their company based on that, because sarcasm doesn't translate well across the language barrier, it turns out. So 2 is a terrible stage to be in, because they're trying to get international knowledge, and it turns out that we have so much jargon that that's impossible. It doesn't come across. Like, you need to send somebody there, you need to bring people there that can add nuance to make that work. But 3 and 4 is where things get interesting, because 3 and 4 is where we here could also try and make things better a bit. Try to, like, maybe allow people elsewhere to also make video games. So, does anybody know what this traffic signs means? You Americans have it way smarter. You just put one way on your sign. This is the one-way sign in most of the world, actually. Steps 3 and 4 are currently one-directional. But we can make an effort to create a dialogue here, even across those language borders. So if you are making games, if you localize your games, make sure that the language is right. I think at GDC I said if your English is not Simlish, make sure your Arabic isn't either. That's a pretty good tip. Create tools that support multiple languages. If you make a tool, make sure that it supports Arabic, Russian, Chinese, Hebrew, stuff like that, right to left. It's all a lot of work, I know, it's boring. You have to make things work and like take care of people around the world. Do it, okay? Like, screw that, do it. And be aware of jargon, because jargon is a wonderful method for people to communicate on high levels. It's also a wonderful method of making sure that people in other places in the world have no idea what you're talking about. So in the case that you do something with events or something on a more structural level of the industry, curation can be really important. The curation I did here specifically focused on games that express culture unintentionally. And think about a lot of the rules that are in place for your event. The requirement for a curated game to have the developer present basically excludes most of the world immediately, because that's really expensive. Money is a big one, but also like allowing for mentorships in places that are not here, and having sign-up pages for your events that aren't just English. You know what worked really well on making sure Arabs submitted their game was making a sign-up page in Arabic and then doing an Arabic press release about that. It's really great. It turns out that people read the Arabic press in the Arab world. And when you think about language, our traditional sort of way of thinking about language is something called EFIGs, which is English, French, Italian, German, Spanish. If you ask a localization company what to localize to, they'll give you that as an answer. And if they're really, really eager to earn a lot of money, they'll also say Portuguese and probably simplified Chinese. But Portuguese, Arabic, Russian, Chinese, simple Chinese, simplified Chinese, those are huge languages to think about. If you are doing an event and you want submissions from all over the world, it's all it takes. Let somebody translate it and then make sure that it's actually Arabic. So localization is important for many reasons. Reaching out across the language barrier is important for many reasons. It's not just an economical one, like us finding new markets. It's a cultural one, like games like Farce existing. And these games already exist. There are wonderful games everywhere around the world. We just have to look their way and figure out how to communicate. And I think that we have done, as an industry, an amazing job at improving developer democratization. In the past few years, it's been made easier than ever for people to start making video games. And a large part of that is thanks to tools like Twine or GameMaker. Twine, until very recently when we pointed this out, did not support Arabic. This is the tool that we all heralded as a great example of making game development more diverse, and it is. It is. Twine is amazing. It is hugely important to allowing people to get into the games industry if you speak English. And jargon is really useful, but it's built upon an increasingly huge stack of single language knowledge, and that makes it dangerous. Now, on the other side, most game developers around the world don't actually know that Games for Change is a thing. They don't know about Indicate. They've never heard of the Game Developers Conference. They're unaware, if they are aware of those events, that they can submit games. That's unexpected. And for people that don't have access to English, very common, an economical factor is part of that. So economic realities play into this too. Who knows what this is? This is the Russian ruble. This is how well it's doing. It is doing so poorly that a bunch of platforms actually had to instate new price tiers that didn't exist before, just so Russian people can still buy video games. I think the price tier currently is like 14 cents. And that's relatively expensive right now in those territories. So asking people to just come fly out so that they can give a talk, that doesn't work. That is, in fact, incredibly exclusionary, as are a lot of the submission fees to events. And one really simple tip that we've seen work around the world, the Left Field collection in England actually proved this, is if you just remove the requirement for people to be at an event if their game gets shown, fixes it. If you want the one simple takeaway if you're an event organizer, don't force people to be at your event. Sounds really, really strange, but it works. More than anything, I think we need a dialogue. Sharing knowledge is fundamental to growing a community, but many communities have to do with only the knowledge that exists in their language, instead of the almost, like the enormous knowledge base that we have in English. And we can help make sure that that knowledge spreads. And that's an initiative that I've been working on for the past year. So, Gamedev.world is something I announced back at GDC. And the idea is that it is a website. The URL is Gamedev.world. If you go there now, there is nothing there currently because we're still working on it. We were supposed to launch right around now, but we are not. We're still working on it. We've been working on, basically what the idea is that we want to create a repository of knowledge. A repository of knowledge about design, about development, about art, about sound, about business, about marketing, about theory, about the academics. We want to put that in one place, which is great for all of you because now you can find all of the information that is really, really useful in one spot. And then we're going to pay to have it translated. We're going to translate it to every major language in the world. And we're going to start with Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese. And we're going to make all that knowledge available to people around the world. And then we're going to invite them to ask, to figure out what kind of articles they want next, what kind of content they want next, what is relevant in their culture. And we're going to have that translated too. And eventually, we want to grow this into one giant community-driven thing that will make knowledge available around the world in every language. We're currently working on garnering advisory reports that will help us create the first batch of content. But we're also making sure that the advisory report is not just European and American. So we're searching actively for people around the world that are experts in their field, and there are a lot of them, thankfully. But, and as a closing thought, this is not a single effort that somebody can make. This Gamedev.world is not the solution to a problem. It is an effort to sort of maybe improve things a little bit. And that's the best we can do. But if all of us think about this, if all of us next time we make a game and we translate it, we think about maybe supporting right to left. Or maybe think about making sure that your Arabic is not offensive and actually Arabic. If we, next time we organize an event or have a meeting about this, we just look slightly across our borders towards places where maybe we don't really understand what people are saying. We try to make an effort to talk to them. This industry can be richer in perspective. It can reach more people around the world. And it can establish a world in which video games are as global as play is. Thank you very much.